Welcome back to another Film Geek movie review. In just a moment, I'm going to walk my happy butt over to the futon to check out the Shudder original, Dead Male. Dead Male is written and directed by Joe DeBoer and Kyle McConaughey. It's starring Sterling Mason Jr., John Fleck, and Tomas Boykin. It tells the story of a dead letter agent. Now, if you're not familiar with that is, that's a letter that cannot be sent or mailed out to anybody. It doesn't really have a return address or an address. It just ends up in this investigator's office. So this investigator decides to get to the bottom of what this letter is, and wouldn't you know it, it's a letter of help from a person who's been captured by a serial killer. So this investigator sets out on trying to find out who this person is and hopefully save them from whatever situation they're in. This movie looks like it's going to be really cool, very stressful, and very tense, and it's set in the 1980s, which I just absolutely love. I don't even know if there is a Dead Letters office anymore. I don't even honestly know if there's a U.S. Postal Service anymore. But you know what? It's enough of me sitting here jibber-jabbering on. It is time for me to get over to the old futon because, one, good old Haku is waiting on me, and as I've said before, never keep a tabby cat waiting on a horror movie. So I need to get over to the futon and check out Dead Male. Getting done watching Dead Male, and guys, I thought this movie was pretty good. I think that some folks are going to like it. For me, honestly, I kind of think this was a kind of a 50-50 movie. I like where this movie was going. I like some of the things that it was doing. It just didn't quite stick it for me, but I do think it's definitely worth a viewing if it sounds interesting. So let's get this started, shall we? We're going to get things started with negatives, then move into the positives to end the video on the ever so important high note. Okay, so the first thing I want to talk about is just the pacing in this film. This movie is slow, and I don't mean necessarily slow as in like slow burn. I mean slow. You really feel the entire runtime of this movie, which is just around an hour and 45 minutes. And to be perfectly honest, guys, I think that was a little too long. This movie could have been tightened up a little bit, and that has a lot to do with the second act. Now, I kind of like the way that the storytelling worked in this film. I thought it could have worked, but unfortunately, the second act was a little draggy. What the film does is it sets everything up. It starts off right at the get-go with the letter, or note, however you want to look at it, getting delivered. And then the investigation begins into where did this letter come from and what's going on. So we start to follow our dead male agent in his search on what's going on with this piece of paper they find. And that is all super intriguing. Well, that whole story kind of comes to a climax and then zips into a flashback, and it goes into the whole story of how this person was kidnapped and how that all went down. And while it's really interesting and some great acting and some really great scenes and so on, it does kind of drag on. That second act, there could have been a lot of stuff that could have been removed to just kind of speed things up a little bit and get into that big payoff that comes at the end, because it does do the typical slow burn fashion, where it's going to burn for a while and then we get to something that's a pretty decent payoff in the end. But I just felt like it really, really slows down in that second act to a point where you might actually lose interest, even though it's really intriguing finding out what led to all of this. What had this person, what made him go crazy and decide to kidnap this person, and all the events that led up to the delivery of said letter in the mail. All of that was intriguing and all, it just takes its time getting there. This movie is trying to do that whole like full sensory experience when it comes to the film, and so in that second act there's a lot of very slow, quiet moments. And this is something that I'm going to put into like a mixed category. This movie is not very heavy on the dialogue. This is one of those experience type of films where there's a lot of unique sound design and camera angles, cinematography, and things like that that also go into the storytelling, not just the actors going along, talking and saying their lines and all. There's a lot of quiet moments of acting in this film, and that kind of stuff really does slow the movie down, and there's a lot of it in that second act, and unfortunately it does start to get to a point where you do start to lose a little interest in what might be going on with all of this. So I could see that being something at some point where people are just like, oh man, just get there. Also, the sound design, while it's also extremely amazing and good, which we'll get to in the positives, there are points in this where things are very shrill and high pitch and loud, which I do feel is there to definitely cause emotion and all. This is again in the mixed, so just be aware that that's definitely going to be something that could possibly irritate you. So just be ready to have maybe your sound system set up on nighttime. I don't know if you have that on yours. Mine does, where it takes the louder explosions and all and tones those down and then beefs up the voices and music, and also, it doesn't have big loud noises that go boom throughout the entire house. So that might help out with some of that sound design that goes on throughout this film, because there's this whole story with a synthesizer and all, which we'll go into when we get to the soundtrack, but it does add to some very uncomfortable moments with the sound. Now, all of that being said, I don't think this movie was terrible. I just think that it was hard to get through because of just how slow moving this movie goes. But once we start getting into it, once we get past that second act into the third act and we start getting back into the investigation of this letter, then things start to pick up again. We get to follow some new investigators at the post office trying to figure out where this letter came from. And then the film itself starts to pick up again. It gets a lot more intriguing. Maybe it's just me. Maybe I just like an investigation story, so it was easier to suck me into those moments. Okay, so let's get into the positives. The first thing I want to talk about is that sound design. Now, while there are moments of some really high-pitched, shrill sounds, which I think was the use of a theremin, a lot of this soundtrack, I believe, was using a theremin, which was an old instrument that was used in a lot of 60s sci-fis back in the day, and it has a very sci-fi sound to it, very dreamy, high-pitched sound. You know what I'm talking about if you're a fan of the Flaming Lips. So there is that sound effect used a lot, and in a lot of moments the sound design and the soundtrack does help drive the emotions of this movie, and I did like the way that all worked out. There's also an extremely good and tense, wonderful synth horror soundtrack to this film. This movie does dive into a lot with synthesizers and all, and it does show in the soundtrack, and I absolutely love the music that was in this film. The cinematography is outstanding. I love all of the usage of the different angles and all that are used in order to make us, the viewer, feel very disoriented, or also kind of giving a feeling like we're a fly on the wall, just sitting in there watching all of these events take place. This film also does something else really cool, and that is it stays fairly grounded within reality. It doesn't get outside the boundaries of things that could possibly happen, making this film feel very solid and real, and also really adding to the dread of this movie. Now, this film might not feel like a full-on horror film and more like a thriller, but one thing that the movie does extremely well is build an overwhelming feeling of dread throughout the entire film. I did feel uneasy and squeamish throughout the entire movie, and again, I really think that it helped to the overall experience and viewing pleasure of this movie. All in all, I would say that the experience of watching this film was pleasant. I did enjoy it. It was just finally getting there at the end and getting to our payoff that really kind of took the wind out of me. All in all, guys, I would have to say that this film is a solid get out there and watch it kind of movie on streaming services. Maybe just check it out of curiosity. If you're somebody who is a big fan of a movie like The Outer Water or Skinamarink, Dink, or was it just Skinamarink? I can't remember. But those type of movies, that kind of immersive horror, you're probably going to find a lot here because it combines that immersive horror with a really fun investigation story. So all in all, check this film out of curiosity. I don't necessarily necessarily feel like this is the kind of film that you're going to want to get a Shudder subscription to if you don't already have one, but if you are a fan of horror, you are a fan of Shudder, it's there. Check it out, see what you think. Alright guys, that's all I have for you today. Thanks again for watching the Film Geek. If you liked what you saw here today, go ahead and subscribe to the channel, ring that bell for notifications, and give me the old thumbs up so I know you like what you're seeing. And if there's one more thing you can do, folks, that is keep watching movies. You know I'm gonna. Hey, thanks for sticking around. Much like you should probably stick around at the end of the movie. Don't turn this thing off once the credits start rolling. One of the coolest little tricks they use is actually in the credits to make you feel like this was an actual true story. And I'm not going to tell you whether or not this was a true story. You're going to have to find out on your own. Cheers to you. Keep on watching movies.